Hey, welcome to Journey Online. I'm so glad that you've chosen to join with us from wherever you are today. We're in the second part of a series called Weeds in My Garden. Started last week. If you haven't had a chance to see it, go back and grab that before you're done with this today. It's built on a lyric from a song, and it talks about the weeds that are in my garden, and they kind of draw this picture of things that come into my life that steal or rob the beauty that God created for me to enjoy. There's good things in my life, but there's something that keeps creeping in, and it sucks the joy, it sucks the oxygen, it sucks the beauty out of my life. We're just going to refer to them as weeds in my garden. One of the things we kind of introduced last week is that those weeds can come from 4 different places, and these planters kind of represent that. They can come from circumstances and things that are around us. It's really important for us to be able to recognize where those things are coming from to know how to deal with them. It can come from circumstances. Man, that's just the world around me. It's just the situations I'm being thrown into. And to recognize that is a big deal. Sometimes some of those weeds are biological. They're physical. They're things that I'm fighting and dealing with. But some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. You're going through stuff right now, and it is sucking the life and the beauty of your life out from under you. You recognize that I am fighting this every day, and it feels like I am pushing a bus up a hill. It's biological. Or sometimes it's not just that, it's clinical. Sometimes we recognize that I have got some stuff that I need professional help to walk through. This isn't I'm going to say a prayer, I'm going to sing a song, I'm going to talk to a buddy. Sometimes we need help that's bigger than us. We need professionals who can help point us in a different direction. And then for all of us, we recognize that there are spiritual things, spiritual weeds that come into our garden that rob us. And truthfully, these don't operate separately from one another. Often when something comes into my life that's circumstantial, it can cause me to be depressed, to be overwhelmed. Sometimes when that happens, I don't know if this ever happens with you, when I'm feeling some of the circumstantial stuff, it affects my biological world. Sometimes it makes us not eat. Like I haven't been able to eat for days, or maybe, for some of us it goes the other direction and it makes us eat all the time. It's like my circumstances, I just kind of lose myself and I'm eating everything I can find. Sometimes all of that leads to very biological things. Those things can go together. Sometimes all of that leads me to a spot where I need help from outside, not just a friend. I need professional help. And then recognizing that all of that affects my spiritual life, and my spiritual life affects all of that. That's what we're talking about for 9 weeks, Weeds in My Garden, and how do we find our way through that? As we begin to dig into all of those things, today I want us to start with this piece. This is kind of our foundational passage as we walk through. It says this in Ephesians 6:10, "Be strong in the Lord and in His might, in His mighty power. Put on God's armor so that you'll be able to stand firm against all the strategies of the devil." And it starts introducing a concept to us. And it's weird. It sounds kind of spooky and odd. I think it's one we have to recognize. It says that we need to be strong and stand firm. And the reason it uses these words of powerful words, is that there are strategies being used against us, and they come through these areas of our life. It goes on to say, "For we're not fighting against flesh and blood." Not flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in the dark world, against evil spirits in heavenly places. All of these things use this phrase, this word against. It just says we're in a fight. The problem is we're often in a fight, losing a fight, because we don't even recognize there is a fight. A couple of weeks ago, my family was down in Panama City, and we went out on the water for a day. And I don't know, for me, there's something kind of majestic about that. We're kind of out, and you can look across the bay, and it just seems massive and overwhelmingly amazing. And then you can look where the bay turns into the Gulf, and you can just see forever. As far as you can see, there's just more of it. And sometimes when I'm in the middle of all of that and I'm looking around at God's creation, I can't help but wonder, how can anybody look at that and not believe there's something bigger than us, not believe there's a God? It is overwhelmingly obvious that there is a God who made and put all that together. And then we're going along on the boat, watching some little dolphins go around beside us, and you see all of the things. You just go, there is obviously a God. You know what I'm saying? For me, that can be so obvious to me, but sometimes, by the way, we can look around our world and look at the brokenness and look at what doesn't work and look at the evil or the things that are corrupted, and I can't help but be overwhelmingly amazed by the fact that some people can look around and not believe there's something working against what is good. Just as obvious as creation screams out there is a God, the brokenness of our world screams equally loud that there is something, there is someone who is working against us, and we have to recognize that. It is impossible to win a fight that we don't recognize is a fight. And for a lot of us, that's where we live. We wake up and we do our thing day after day without accepting and recognizing that there's more going on than meets the eye. And it comes to us in all of these ways, and it affects us in ways that most of us don't even realize. The truth of the matter is, we have an enemy who wants to take our life. This is a truth you're going to hear over and over through this series. We have an enemy who wants to take our life all at once. He would just say, I'll wipe you off the face of the earth. I don't want God's truth to prevail. I don't want God to prevail, and I don't want you to prevail. We have an enemy who wants to take our life. He'll do it all at once, or he'll take a little piece at a time. And for a lot of us, that's what we're experiencing right now. We're experiencing an enemy who has planted these weeds in our garden, and little by little it is sucking the life out of us. We want to deal with three things this week and the next 2 weeks, three foundational pieces that explain how the enemy often works. He does it through lies, three particular lies we're going to look at. The first one we look at today, lie number one, is I am alone and unknown. This is a weird one because it doesn't seem like that big a deal, but it is a big deal, and it's a deal that affects us all. Sometimes it shows up in different pieces of our life. It shows up in different ways. It may feel different for you than it does me. It seldom makes sense when somebody else says it, but it makes perfect sense when it's me. I'll try to give you some example of that as we dig in. Alone doesn't mean that there's no one around, because some of us feel like there's nowhere in the world you can go that somebody's not there. Some of you live in a home that is crowded with human beings. Some of you try to escape and go somewhere, but wherever you go, there's somebody else there. Alone doesn't mean that there's nobody around. Matter of fact, you can be alone in a room full of people. A few years back, I was sitting with a college student at Texas A&M University, and probably 21-year-old guy, and he's just talking to me, and he said, Chris, I am struggling so much in life. He was on a campus with 60-something thousand people. There's people everywhere you go. In his living facility, he'd come and hung out where I was, and there were people all over the place. Man, finding a place we could sit down and have a private conversation was difficult. And his words to me is, Chris, I have never felt so alone in my life. And from an outsider's view, I'm like, dude, you had to step over bodies just to get to where we are sitting right now. There's people everywhere. If you walked into your apartment, there's people everywhere. You've got 2 roommates. You've got 150 people on your floor. You've got 500 people just in your building. There's people everywhere. When you go to class, there's people everywhere. How could you possibly feel alone? And you just came yesterday from a football game, and there were 100,000 people watching mediocre football. Yeah, I said it. And how could you possibly feel alone? And here's the reality. You can be alone in a room full of people. And some of you, and certainly I, have felt this one, that I can be around a lot of people but still feel all alone. I can feel like I I am all by myself. Let me say it another way. We said alone and unknown. Unknown doesn't mean that people don't know who you are. There's a lot of people who know my name. They know who I am. They go, oh, you're that guy. Sometimes they know more about me than I know about them because I stand up in places like this. I had some videos done a bunch of years ago when we were doing some marriage teaching. And they showed the videos in a college course, and I remember going to eat one day, and I ordered my food, and the guy goes, oh, you're the marriage guy. And I'm like, I'm just Chris. And he starts saying, no, you said that. And I'm like, how in the world could you possibly know that? He goes, oh, I'm in school, and they're showing that in my class right now. And I'm like, yeah, whatever, dude, just give me my tacos, you know? Sometimes it feels like a lot of people know you, but that's not what unknown means. Unknown feels like no one completely knows you. They may know your name, they may know who you are, they just don't know you. That's a big difference, right? I don't feel understood. Sometimes you can live in a home with people who know you, they've seen you at your best and your worst, but you feel like, I don't think you know me. You know about me, you just don't know me. You don't understand. I don't feel like I fit in anywhere. I don't feel like I'm known or understood. I feel like I work in a place where everybody wants something from me. They push me towards something. Everybody's got a goal, everybody's got a need, but does anybody know me? Does anybody understand about me? You can work in a place that is full of people and feel completely alone and unknown. You can be in a marriage where you feel completely alone and unknown. A lot of people, the reason they get married is because they don't want to be alone. And then one of the things I hear most when people going through difficulty in the marriage is they feel all alone. It's an unfortunate way, hey, but when it hits, it affects everything in our life, and recognizing where it's coming from and what it's doing to us is a huge deal in the process. We'll learn a little bit about what that looks like through a story about a man named Elijah. Elijah is a guy who was pointed out by God or appointed by God to be his spokesperson, his microphone. And he went and told a really evil king, he said, because of the things you've done and because you've worshiped other gods, there's going to be a famine in the land. It's going to be bad. It's going to be a drought and a famine, and it's going to ruin a lot of things. And man, it did for years and years and years. And at the end of it, God sent a very not popular Elijah back to this wicked king to tell him, hey, it's about to end, but before it ends, God wants to display who God is. And so Elijah said, here's what we want to do. It's about to rain, but before it rains, this is what I want to do. I want you to know there is one God, not many gods, and you should worship him. And if you don't, it's going to cost you more. And so Elijah challenged him to bring all the prophets of their gods. So they brought 450 prophets from the God that he worshiped, which was Baal. And 400 prophets from the wicked witch of the west, his wife, who worshipped Asherah. So 850 prophets come together. And Elijah said, I want you to build an altar and put a sacrifice on it. And I want all of your prophets to pray that God will bring down fire and consume the sacrifice. And they did. And it didn't work. These guys went nuts. They prayed louder, they prayed longer, they cut themselves, they rolled on the ground, they did all of these things and nothing happened. And then, long story made short, Elijah comes along and he covers it all with water to make it more complicated, and he prays and God consumes. He consumes the sacrifice with fire. And everybody recognized that while there are a lot of small case G gods, that there was only one capital G God. And Elijah has the prophets destroyed. And it's this amazing win. Of all of the wins in the Bible, could you see one bigger than this? Is one guy standing by himself in front of all of these other powerful people, and God demonstrating his faithfulness and his power through all of that. And Elijah's like, yes. And now you know, and now it's going to rain. It's going to happen. And so the evil king goes all the way back home, and he tells the wicked witch of the west, Jezebel, what has happened. And she is torqued. She is ticked off. As a matter of fact, Jezebel sent this message to Elijah. She said, may the God strike me. May the gods strike me and even kill me if by this time tomorrow I have not killed you just like you killed all of these prophets. She is ticked off, and now she threatens the guy who just stood and watched God overcome 850 prophets. He stood toe to toe with 850. God showed up and did everything. And now because of one woman, he's scared to death. He gets threatened and it scares him. Literally, it almost scares him to death. Now, some of you are like, I completely understand that. I'd feel much more comfortable in front of 850 dudes than one scary woman. And that may be where you are now. But in this case, wouldn't you like to believe that what God had just done, it would be enough to keep this guy stable? But there was a lie that began to seep into his head. There were weeds that crept into his garden. And this lie, this weed, was one that was overwhelming to our friend Elijah. When these things happen, maybe we can learn to diagnose. If there's, in my flower bed, if there's weeds starting to grow the way I diagnose it, I look at it and go, there's a weed right there. That is not a bush. That is not a flower. That is a weed. Sometimes it's harder in real life. So here's some signs that a lie is beginning to take root in our life. One of the first things we do, whether it's happened circumstantially or biologically, or clinically or spiritually, however it's happening, one of the first things that happen for most of us when weeds start to steal the beauty and the goodness out of our life is we tend to isolate. When we need people more than we ever did, we often pull away. That's a horrible thing. Often when people who go to church and fellowship together, often when those people mess up or feel like they're underwater, you would think that's when we would lean toward each other and say help. But for most of us, our first thing to do is to pull away and go, man, I don't want anybody to see. I don't want to be around people. I don't need somebody to judge me, analyze me, or to notice what's going on in my life. Is that often we isolate. It says that for Elijah in 1 Kings 19, it says that he went alone into the wilderness, traveling all day. He sent his friends and his servant away, and he goes off by himself. We tend to isolate. By the way, one of the most dangerous things that happens in our life is when we feel the beauty being drawn from our life and we pull away. It typically is a bad move. The second piece is we usually start to feel really empty and tired. Maybe this is what you're going through today. You're like, man, I used to love to be around people. I used to love my little circle of friends. Lately, man, when they call, I'm like, man, I don't have time. I don't have the energy. I just do what I do and I go home and shut down. Often it's because the weeds have crept in and they are sucking the life out of our life. We begin to feel empty and tired. Maybe that's where you are today. It says he sat down under a solitary broom tree and he prayed that he might die. He went off by himself and he finally just sat down and said, you know what? Enough is enough. I am tired. I am so over this. I don't want to play anymore. I've tried to do what I've tried to do. And you know what? It's just not enough. And I am done with that. Maybe that's where you're feeling today. You're like, you know what? I've hit a spot where I just wish everybody would leave me alone. And to be honest with you, I am just exhausted. There's not a lot of fight left in me. Well, that's a sign that the weeds have taken root in your life, and we have to begin to see what to do with that. The third piece of that is we tend to rehearse and repeat our story, our scenario. This is what happens when, by the way, when circumstances get difficult and we feel underwater. It's what happens when biologically we begin to get depleted, when we really need professional help, and spiritually we feel like the God that used to be so real is a million miles away. We start rehearsing and repeating our story. What happened for Elijah was really unique because God came and cared for him physically, biologically. He gave him food and he gave him rest to restore him. And then God came to him eventually And he came to him in big ways to kind of demonstrate his power. He came to him like in a storm or an earthquake or all of these different, fire. Just so you go, wow. But then God came in a small voice to him to kind of help him understand that he wasn't alone and he wasn't unknown. And eventually, God asked him, what are you doing here? And Elijah's answer was this. He said, I have zealously served the Lord God Almighty. And he starts, and this is what he's going to do. He's going to rehearse and repeat. He starts off by saying, listen, he's telling God this because God would never know this. Sometimes this is the way it works with me when I'm going through struggles. I start explaining things to God. I mansplain to God. That's some smart move right there. I'm trying to help God understand because I don't feel known and I don't feel understood. And I feel alone. I start explaining, God, I just don't understand this. Here's what I've been doing. I have zealously served the Lord God Almighty, to which we would think, what's he expecting God to go, I did not see that. I'm glad you mentioned that. Wow. Oh, me. You know, what did he expect from God? But he begins, because one of the things we do is we rehearse and repeat, and then he goes on. He said, but the people of Israel, those people, by the way, your people, they've broken their covenant with you, and they've torn down your altars. You get a feeling that he's a little ticked off at God too. He's ticked off at the people. He's ticked off at the circumstances. He's ticked off at God. He's a little ticked off. That's what happens when the weeds creep in. We tend to be ticked off at the world in which we live. They tore down your altars. They killed every one of your prophets. And then he gets to this point, I'm the only one left. I am alone and unknown. And I'm tired. I'm tired of fighting this. And now they're trying to kill me too. You want to know why I am where I am? You want to know why I'm doing what I'm doing? Well, there's the reason. Everything's gone bad. And I'm exhausted. And instead of looking for help and understanding that maybe there's someone who can take him to a different place, he just says, I'm ready to be done with this whole thing. And they're after me now, and I don't know what I'm going to do. One of the things that we have to understand when those things become evident in our life, what God will typically do with all of us, he'll start with something like this. This is the way his story ends. God said, I got something I want you to do. Get up, let's go. Don't be isolated. Don't be withdrawn. I've got a plan. And by the way, I've always had a plan. When you felt like you were the only one and the whole world was after you, I was involved then. Just like I was involved when it was you against 850, and now it's you against one wicked woman. I am still with you, and I still have a plan. And here's what we're going to do. Hands in the huddle, everybody. Here's the play. He said, I want you to anoint Jehu to be the king of Israel. That's the next king. I want you to get busy. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to step out, and I want you to go. I've picked out somebody for the future, because there's a future. This isn't the end of the story. And then I want you to go to Elisha, and I want you to anoint him, because he's going to be my next prophet. He's going to do what you're doing. You're not alone. You're not forgotten. You're not unknown. I know what you're feeling. I know what you're going through. I know your circumstances, and I have a plan. And this is where it starts, with a new king and a new prophet. And then he says one other really interesting thing. He said, and I will preserve 7,000 others in Israel who have never bowed down to Baal. They all bowed down. They all quit. I'm the only one that's left. And he goes, and I just want to remind you of this. There's 7,000 more that are still out there. You're not alone. You're not the only one who feels this. There's 7,000 others who've never bowed down, who've never bowed the knee, who've never kissed the idol. They're still faithful. And I'm going to preserve them just like I preserved you. It's this crazy reality when it feels like I'm alone and unknown. What God wants to say is, it's time for you to recognize that I still have a plan. I haven't left you and I haven't forgotten you. The last thing you are is alone. And you will never be unknown, because the one who made you. There's all kinds of weird stuff in the Bible that says that God knows the number of hairs on my head. He knew me before I ever even came into existence, when I was just not a fetus but in the womb, that he knew me then and he knows me now. It tells me that stuff. I'll be honest, I don't care. He knows how many days I'll be alive. I don't care. Knowing how many hairs on my head, that doesn't help me. When I read that, I don't go, oh, I feel so much better. God can count hairs. And I lost some yesterday, so he's obviously keeping count. I don't care about that. But the understanding that he understands, the understanding that he has a plan for me, the understanding there's something bigger going on than just what I see in my circumstances or feel in my body, the understanding of those things changes everything, because then I can trust. Lie number one is I'm alone and unknown, and if I want to get beyond that, I have to recognize that it is a lie, that God has not left me alone. And by the way, it's not just God, that there are others in the world. I may not see it or feel it right now, but there's others in the world that do understand and that do know, that go through what I go through and can help. The first thing I got to do is recognize that it's a lie. I got to recognize it for what it is. I don't need to water the weeds. And the more I rehearse and repeat, the more I isolate what I'm doing, is I'm giving power to the thing that the enemy is trying to use to destroy me. The second thing I can do, I got to turn down the noise. All of the crazy in my head, all of the crazy in our world, all of the stuff that's coming at me that says, I'm going to kill, you kill them and I'm going to kill you. I wish I would rather be dead than you to stay alive. I'm coming after you. I'm coming after you. I'm coming after you. I have to turn down all of the noise. Sometimes I have to turn down all of the distraction, because God often comes, and he comes more in a whisper than he does in a whirlwind. And for me to understand that I am known and I am not alone, I have to turn down some of the noise in my life. And sometimes that means I have to turn my attention towards something bigger and better than me, not just the things that are coming against me. The last part of that, I need to invest in someone else. That's what he did with Elijah. He said, hey, listen, you've isolated. I'm going to push you back out of your little cocoon, your little hellhole you're living in, because I've still got a job for you and I'm not finished with you. And when you invest in someone else, usually it fortifies you, because you get to see God use you to make a difference in your world. Instead of isolating from the world, I'm going to put you back in the world, but it's because I have a purpose and I'm with you, and you're not alone in this. You weren't alone before, and you're not alone now. That's the way it's going to work for you. That's the plan I have for you. I read a story recently about a guy who said when he was a 5-year-old, he was in kindergarten, in his kindergarten class. His teacher, right before Christmas, had a plan, and she was going to bring in a Santa Claus, and it was going to surprise all the kids. And so after lunch one day, said that she sits them all down and says, I have a surprise for you. And all of a sudden, this really large man in a red suit and a beard comes in, and he was bigger than life, and he had this big booming voice, and he came in with a ho, 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 and greeted the kids. And he said, I've come here today because I know if you've been naughty or nice. And what I'm going to do is sit down in this chair, and I want you to come up and sit in my lap and tell me what you want for Christmas. And I'm going to tell you if you've been good or bad, and whether or not you're going to get it. And the kid was sitting there. His name is Richard. Richard's just sitting there, and he's like, I was so overwhelmed. One, he's like, does he know all the bad things I've done? Am I going to get in trouble? And then who is he? And he's bigger and he's scary. And I felt like the last thing I wanted to do with that. And then he looked at me first, points at me, and says, you, young man, you come up here first. So, man, I was shaking in my tennis shoes. Said I was freaking out. Who is this big man, and what does he know about me, and why is he doing this to me? And I don't want to sit in his lap. And he sat him down, and he said he could tell. The Santa could tell that the little boy was shaking and was scared and was intimidated. He said he whispered in his ear something that nobody else could hear. And he said, Richard, it's me, Mr. Cooper from church. It's okay. You know me. And I know you. He said in that moment, everything was okay. Little boys and Santa Claus doesn't mean much to us, but can I just tell you this? There's a God in this world who comes and whispers in the ear of human beings every day. And he just says, I know there's a lot going on, but it's me. And I know you, and I've always known you, and I'm with you. It's all right. You can talk to me. You can trust me. It's me, Richard, Mr. Cooper from church. For a lot of us, that's what we need to hear today, that you are not alone and you are not unknown. It may not seem like anybody understands you, and it may not seem like you fit, but can I just tell you, in God's eyes, He knows you, He chose you, and He cares for you. And He will, no matter what your circumstances, no matter what you're feeling, no matter how overcome you are. If it feels like there's weeds that are sucking the life out of you, you are not alone, and you can turn to Him today. For me, this is a really hard thing because I live in a world where people know who I am. And I live in a world of crowds, and I like that. I like all of that. But here's the problem. There's something inside of me that pulls me back all the time that just goes, you're never going to be good enough. You're never going to live up to everybody's expectation. And there's something inside of me. There's this lie that goes on all the time that says they don't know you. They know the image of you. But if they knew the real you, they'd never like you. They'd never care for you. They'd never support you. They'd never follow you. There's a piece in me that goes throughout over and over. And I wonder sometimes where I fit in this world. I don't think I fit. I don't think I fit where I am. I don't think I fit over there or over there. And it's weird because I've lived a great life and I've been so blessed by God. And there's times in a room full of people where I just wonder if I fit with any of it, if I've got a spot, if anybody really knew, and if they did really know, if they'd really care. And if they did really know and they really cared, if they would love me. And there's a God who still whispers in my ear over and over when I turn down the noise and when I focus on what's real and identify the lies, that over and over He comes and He says, I chose you, not because you're so good, but because I choose to love you. There's nothing you could do to get more of my love. There's nothing you could do to lose my love. I choose you. It's me, Chris. Mr. Cooper, it's me, Chris. It's your father. And you are not alone. And you are not unknown. And I have a plan. If you're going through this lie in your world today, would you identify it as a lie? Would you start to dig back out? It's just one little piece of a big puzzle. But if this lie lives in your world, it will steal the beauty. It will leave you tired, exhausted, at wit's end. And eventually it'll steal the beauty from the life that God created you to enjoy. This day, can I just say, on God's behalf, you are not alone. And you are certainly not unknown. And oh, by the way, there's a lot of other people that God has chosen and preserved, and He will use in your life as well. Don't underestimate the power of the God who made everything. So God, help us recognize, realize that you're up to more than what we know. And that when life seems overwhelming, you are overwhelming. You are bigger than our circumstances. You're bigger than our biology. You are bigger than what's going on around us. And help us turn toward you, turn the noise down in our head, identify the lie, and allow you to comfort and bring peace and purpose to our life. We ask it in your name. Amen. Hey, thanks so much for watching.